The neighborhood looked calm from the outside. It's a kind of place where people waved when walking their dogs and kids rode their bikes after school. But for the homeowner who had moved in just a year earlier, that calm feeling had slowly started to fade. It began the morning a white envelope showed up in the mailbox. At first, it didn't seem like anything serious. It had the HOA logo on the front, and the homeowner assumed it was just a reminder about some community event or maybe a newsletter. But when the envelope was opened and the letter unfolded, the tone inside felt nothing like the friendly, welcoming voice that the HOA had shown during move-in. The letter complained about a trash bin left near the curb for an unreasonable amount of time. The homeowner remembered bringing the bin in just a few hours later than usual, something most neighbors did all the time. It wasn't a big deal to anyone else. Still, the homeowner thought maybe they were just being extra strict. Maybe they were trying to keep everything neat. Even though it felt strange, the homeowner shrugged it off and decided to just be more careful. A few days passed quietly. The homeowner got back into their usual routine, going to work. Coming home, taking care of the yard, chatting with a couple of neighbors who seemed friendly. Things felt normal again, until another letter came. This one sounded harsher. It listed a second violation, saying the grass looked slightly uneven near the walkway. The homeowner stared at the letter, confused. The lawn had been mowed just 2 days before. Many yards on the street looked rougher than theirs. It didn't make sense. What made it more unsettling was the tone. There was no greeting, no polite reminder this time. It felt almost like someone was annoyed, even angry. The homeowner wondered if maybe someone on the HOA board had something personal against them, though that sounded silly. After all, they barely knew anyone in the neighborhood. Later that evening, while taking the trash out, the homeowner noticed someone standing on the sidewalk across the street. It was a man from the HOA board, the one who had introduced himself the day they moved in. Back then, he was cheerful, shaking hands, acting like he cared about the new residents. But now, he simply stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching the house like he was waiting for something. When he realized the homeowner saw him, he quickly turned and walked away. That moment stuck in the homeowner's mind. It was the first time they felt something was off. They tried to reason with themselves. Maybe he was just passing by. Maybe he was just out for a walk. But the look on his face didn't feel casual at all. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was even more aggressive. It warned that further violations may result in fines. The homeowner felt their stomach drop. They read the letter twice, then 3 times, trying to understand what rule they had broken this time. It mentioned a decorative planter near the porch, saying it didn't meet HOA guidelines. The planter had been there since the day they moved in. It wasn't new. It wasn't messy. It wasn't bothering anyone. The homeowner finally decided to talk to some neighbors. Maybe others had dealt with this too. Maybe the HOA had become stricter recently. The first neighbor they approached, an older gentleman, who lived 2 houses down, shook his head slowly when asked about the HOA. "They like to act tough," he said, lowering his voice a little. "But they don't bother everyone like this. Just certain people, I guess." The homeowner didn't know what that meant. Certain people? Why them? They had never caused trouble. They had never complained about anyone. They paid dues on time, kept the yard clean, waved at neighbors. Did everything a normal homeowner would do? Another neighbor offered a little more insight. She mentioned that the HOA president had a reputation for making life hard for new residents, but she didn't explain why. She just shrugged and said, "You'll get used to it, or he'll move on to someone else." That line bothered the homeowner even more. Move on to someone else. Like it was a game? Like he chose people to target? The homeowner kept trying to brush off the feeling, but every time they walked outside, they felt watched. Not by everyone. Most neighbors were friendly, but by certain people who seemed to belong to the inner circle of the HOA board. Sometimes they would stand in small groups talking quietly and then glance toward the homeowner's place. Other times the homeowner would catch the HOA president's car slowing down in front of the house. Before driving off, it reached a point where checking the mailbox became a moment of anxiety. Every time the homeowner walked to the curb, they hoped there wouldn't be another envelope. But the next one was impossible to ignore. It was thicker than the others, and had red print on the front that said urgent. Inside was a warning that didn't just list a minor rule issue. It claimed the homeowner was failing to maintain community standards and threatened a potential hearing if they did not correct the listed issues. Reading it made the homeowner feel a mix of confusion and frustration. They walked outside and looked up and down the street, comparing their house to the others. Everything looked normal. Nothing about their yard or porch or driveway was different from anyone else's. In fact, some houses looked like they needed more work than theirs. Yet those houses never seemed to get letters. Their owners never seemed stressed or bothered. The homeowner decided to take photos to compare things. They walked around quietly, snapping pictures of similar yards, trash bins left out, decorations on porches, everything the HOA had complained about. It was clear that other houses had the same things, sometimes even more. But none of those owners had received letters, at least not recently. That night, the homeowner sat at the kitchen table staring at the pile of letters. A small stack, but heavy in a different way. It felt like something was wrong beyond the simple rules. Something personal, something intentional. The next morning brought an even stranger moment. The homeowner left early for work and noticed the HOA president's car parked near the entrance of the street. It wasn't unusual for him to be around, but this time he wasn't talking to anyone or checking anything. He was sitting in his car facing the homeowner's direction. When the homeowner's car backed out of the driveway, the HOA president lifted a clipboard and pretended to write something down. That was the moment the homeowner realized this wasn't normal. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't strict rule enforcement. It felt like someone was keeping track of them, waiting for any small mistake. The homeowner tried to shake off the feeling during the day, but it lingered. By the time they got home, their nerves were already tight. And as if on cue, another envelope was waiting on the porch. This one wasn't even in the mailbox. It had been placed right on the welcome mat, like someone wanted to make sure it was seen immediately. Inside, the letter repeated an earlier warning but added a new line. Failure to comply may lead to additional consequences. The wording felt vague but heavy. It didn't explain what consequences. It didn't specify what rule was broken. It felt like a threat without saying the word. The homeowner considered calling someone from the HOA. But every time they imagined the conversation, they pictured being dismissed or talked down to. They had already seen the way the HOA president acted during board meetings when passing by, always serious, always controlling, never welcoming. Instead of calling, the homeowner decided to go for a walk and clear their head. The sun was starting to set, casting a soft orange glow over the street. A few neighbors were watering their plants and kids were riding bikes. It all looked peaceful on the surface. But then the homeowner saw the same man from the HOA board again, standing near a mailbox across the street. Once again, he wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't checking anything. He was simply watching. This time, when the homeowner met his eyes, he didn't look away. He just stood there, expression blank, almost like he was trying to send a message without saying a word. The homeowner felt a quiet shiver run through them. They walked back home slower than usual, feeling something change inside them. It wasn't fear exactly, but a rising sense that whatever was happening wasn't accidental. Later that night, while sitting alone in the living room, the homeowner replayed everything in their mind: the letters, the strange stares, the quiet whispers from neighbors. Each moment seemed small by itself, but together they formed a picture that was hard to ignore. Something about the HOA wasn't right. Something about the way they were acting didn't feel like rule enforcement. It felt like pressure. Like someone wanted the homeowner to feel uncomfortable. The day ended with the homeowner standing at the front window, looking out at the street as the porch lights flickered on from house to house. It was a quiet street, but that quietness now felt different. Not peaceful. More like waiting. As the homeowner finally stepped away from the window, one last thought settled in their mind. A thought he could no longer push aside. This wasn't just about trash bins or planters. This was something deeper. Something intentional. And whatever the HOA was doing, it felt like the first step in something bigger. The homeowner didn't know what was coming next, but the uneasy feeling in their chest made it clear the strange behavior from the HOA wasn't going to stop on its own. the trouble in the neighborhood, didn't settle down after the first wave of confusing letters. If anything, the situation grew heavier, like a weight pressing on the homeowner's chest each day. Even though they tried to shake it off, enjoy their mornings, keep their home neat, and pretend everything was normal, something inside them tightened whenever they stepped outside. It was like the quiet street had changed its tone, and the air felt different. A few days after the last strange letter, the homeowner came home from work and saw another white envelope sticking out of the mailbox. Their hearts sank before they even pulled it out. The envelope felt familiar at this point. Same logo, same heavy tone inside waiting to be read. They stood by the curb, holding it for a few moments, almost hoping it was something else. A meeting reminder, a holiday notice, anything normal? But deep down, they already knew. The letter was another warning. This time it claimed the driveway had visible stains and needed to be pressure washed immediately. The homeowner stared at the paper, frustrated and confused. The driveway looked the same as everyone else's. A few faint marks from car tires, nothing out of the ordinary. Most houses had worse. Yet here they were, being told it was unacceptable. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel fair. That night the homeowner walked outside to take a closer look. They knelt down, touching the concrete. There was nothing wrong with it. But just as they stood up, they noticed a car slowly rolling past. The same car that had been parked near the entrance a few mornings ago. The same one, driven by the HOA president. The headlights lit up the street and dimmed as the car slowed near the homeowner's house. The homeowner could feel the president's eyes on them through the windshield. For a moment, neither moved. Then the car inched forward again, turning the corner and disappearing. But the feeling it left behind stayed. Something wasn't right. And it was no longer just annoyance, it felt like intimidation. The next morning, the homeowner tried to shake off the tension and get back into their routine. They made coffee, checked emails, and went out to water the plants. Everything seemed calm. A neighbor walking by waved cheerfully, and that small gesture helped ease the homeowner's nerves. But peace only lasted a few minutes. Another letter had been slipped under the front door. This one wasn't like the others. It didn't list a rule or even pretend to be neutral. It simply stated, "You are required to attend an HOA hearing regarding multiple violations," included a date less than a week away. A hearing? For what? Nothing made sense. The homeowner sat on the front steps for a long moment, just staring at the paper. The idea of sitting in a room with the same people who had been sending these letters, watching them twist small things into big accusations, made their stomach churn. But ignoring the hearing wasn't an option. The letter made sure of that. Later that afternoon, the homeowner decided it was time to ask more questions. They walked over to the house of the neighbor who had warned them earlier, the older gentleman from 2 houses down. He was outside trimming some bushes. "Can I ask you something?" the homeowner said quietly. He looked up, paused for a moment, then nodded as if he already knew why they were there. "You're getting the letters too, aren't you?" he asked. The homeowner nodded. "And now they want me at a hearing." "I don't understand what's going on," the man sighed, putting down his clippers. "He's done this before," he said, lowering his voice. "You're not the first person he's tried to push around." The homeowner felt a small shock run through them. "But why?" "I haven't done anything wrong. It doesn't matter," the man replied. "Sometimes he just picks someone new to make an example out of. Maybe he likes feeling like he's in control. Maybe there's something else going on. All I know is, once he sets his eyes on someone, he doesn't stop unless he gets what he wants." "What does he want?" the homeowner asked. The man hesitated. "Around here, rumors spread more quietly than truth. But you should talk to the lady across the street. She knows more than she says." That comment stayed in the homeowner's mind the rest of the day. When the sun began to dip, they gathered the courage to approach the neighbor across the street, a calm woman who spent most of her evenings tending to her small garden. When the homeowner mentioned the letters, she didn't look surprised. Instead, she glanced toward the street, then back at the homeowner. "You're not the first," she said softly. "When he starts sending letters, he doesn't stop. And it always escalates to a hearing. Always. But why?" The homeowner asked again. It was the same question burning inside them. She wiped her hands on her apron. Some people say he likes to show power. Others think he has some kind of arrangement with someone outside the neighborhood. I don't know for sure. But every person he's targeted eventually moved out. Every single one. Those words hit like a rock. Moved out? The homeowner repeated. She nodded slowly. Some held out longer than others. But the pressure gets to you eventually. The homeowner felt a chill, even though the evening air was warm. Was that the goal? To make them so uncomfortable they'd want to leave? To push them out without saying it directly? As they walked home, their minds spun with possibilities. The letters weren't random. They weren't small complaints. They were steps in a process the HOA president had used before. But the homeowner wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not without understanding why this was happening. That night, they pulled out all the letters and laid them across the dining table. Every envelope, every warning, every vague threat. They studied each one carefully, looking for patterns. The handwriting on the envelopes was always the same. The wording never changed much. The letters seemed rushed, almost like they were written late at night or in frustration. And the reasons? Most of them didn't match any real rules. The homeowner began noting down each complaint, then comparing them to the actual neighborhood guidelines printed in the welcome packet they had received when moving in. Most of the so-called violations weren't violations at all. That realization both angered and frightened them. How many people had been pushed away because they didn't know how to stand up against it? The next day, determined to gather more information, the homeowner walked to the small HOA office located near the community entrance. The door was locked, even though office hours were posted on a sign outside. Another resident passing by noticed the homeowner waiting. He rarely keeps regular hours, the resident said with a shrug. Comes and goes as he likes. Most of the board doesn't even know what he's doing half the time. That was another strange piece of information. The HOA president seemed to operate almost alone. The board existed but barely participated. He handled letters, warnings, meetings, everything. Was he the HOA, or had he simply taken control of it over time? The homeowner stood outside the office for a few more minutes, hoping someone would show up, but no one did. They eventually turned back, feeling more anxious than before. That evening, a knock echoed at the front door. The homeowner paused, unsure if they should open it. When they did, a small envelope had been left on the doorstep. No knock, really just the sound of movement. Inside was a printed notice, reminding them about the hearing date. But this time, there was a handwritten line added at the bottom, "You are expected to attend." The handwriting was unmistakable. All night, the homeowner tried to understand why someone would go to such lengths. Why would someone invest so much time into creating stress over tiny rules? What was the benefit? Who gained anything from pushing people out? By the next morning, the homeowner felt drained but strangely clear. They weren't imagining things. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't random enforcement. There was a purpose behind it. The real question now wasn't about the letters. It was about uncovering the reason. The tension grew as the hearing day approached. The homeowner felt nervous every time they saw the HOA president's car. They watched neighbors who avoided eye contact, unsure if they were scared or simply didn't want to get involved. Even the birds chirping in the morning felt distant, like they belonged to a quieter time before all this began. 3 days before the hearing, the older gentleman from 2 houses down stopped by. He knocked lightly and waited. "You should know something," he said quietly, once the homeowner opened the door. "A long time ago, before you moved in, another family went through the same thing. Letters, pressure, a hearing. And not long after that, they sold their house. Some people say they were pushed out. Others say they just couldn't take it anymore." Homeowner listened closely, and the HOA president had a buyer ready for that. "House the same week they left," the man added. That piece of information made the homeowner's breath catch. A buyer waiting? Was that what this was all about? As the man walked away, the homeowner stood frozen in the doorway. A new idea was forming, an idea both shocking and painfully clear. Maybe This wasn't about rule enforcement at all. Maybe this was about making people leave, and maybe the person behind it had something to gain every time a house went up for sale. For the first time since the letters started, the homeowner felt something stronger than fear. They felt determination. If someone wanted them gone, they needed to know why. And they weren't leaving until they found out the truth. The days leading up to the hearing felt strangely long for the homeowner. Almost like time itself had slowed down just to make the nerves stretch out even more. Every morning they woke up hoping that somehow things would go back to normal. That maybe the HOA president would lose interest or realize he'd made a mistake. But nothing like that happened. Instead, small things kept happening that made the whole situation feel heavier. For example, one morning the homeowner found the trash bin tipped over, even though there had been no wind overnight. Another time, the mailbox door was left wide open, even though the homeowner always closed it with care. Little things like that shouldn't have meant much, but they added to the growing feeling that someone wanted to remind them they were being watched. The night before the hearing, the homeowner sat at the dining table with all the letters spread out again. The papers felt almost like pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they created was uncomfortable to look at. They tried to imagine what the hearing would be like. Would it be a fair discussion? Would it be a chance to defend themselves? Or would it be something else entirely, something already set up to make them look guilty, no matter what they said? They didn't know, but they were determined to go. The morning of the hearing arrived quietly. The homeowner woke early, made a simple breakfast, and tried to stay calm. As they stood in front of the mirror straightening their clothes, they felt a mix of fear and stubbornness. They weren't planning to argue or fight. They just wanted the truth. They wanted to understand why they were being targeted. The community center where the hearing was held sat near the entrance of the neighborhood. It was a small brick building that usually hosted meetings, holiday events, and the occasional community yard sale. When the homeowner walked up the steps, they noticed the door was already open. Inside, a long table had been set up with several chairs. The HOA president sat in the middle seat, looking stern and serious. Two other board members sat beside him, though they looked less confident and more tired. Like they didn't really want to be there. A few empty chairs were scattered around the room for residents who might want to attend. Only 3 people had shown up. They didn't look at the homeowner directly. Instead, they whispered among themselves quietly. "Please sit," the president said, motioning toward the chair directly across from him. The homeowner nodded and sat down. The president wasted no time. He slid a thin folder across the table and began reading from a paper inside it. "You have accumulated multiple violations," he began, his tone sharp and rehearsed. "Failure to maintain your driveway. Failure to move your trash bin in a timely manner. Failure to comply with porch decoration guidelines. These repeated issues show a pattern of disregard for community rules." The homeowner listened quietly, letting him finish. When he finally stopped talking, the homeowner spoke slowly. "With respect, most of these rules were not actually broken. I checked the guidelines, and I've taken pictures of other houses with the same things." The president lifted an eyebrow. "Are you saying we are mistaken?" "I'm saying something is wrong," the homeowner replied calmly, "and I want to know why I'm being singled out." A quiet murmur rippled through the few residents watching. The president leaned back slightly. "No one is singling you out. You simply must follow the rules." One of the other board members cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should go over the photos," he suggested softly. But the president shot him a hard look, and the board member fell silent immediately. The homeowner noticed that something about the way the president controlled the room felt off. It wasn't the behavior of someone who wanted fairness. It was the behavior of someone who wanted obedience. The homeowner took a deep breath and continued. "I also spoke to several neighbors," they said. "They told me this has happened before, that some people felt pressured to move, and that a buyer showed up quickly when they left." The room grew very quiet. The president's jaw tightened. "Rumors," he said sharply. "This community thrives on rumors. You should not listen to them." The homeowner didn't back down. "Is there someone waiting to buy my house?" they asked. The president's face froze. Only for a second, but it was enough. One of the residents sitting in the back slowly looked up, her eyes widening slightly. The board members shifted uncomfortably. The tension in the room thickened. The president stood up abruptly. "This hearing is over," he said, gathering his papers quickly. "We will send you a decision by mail. Good day." He walked out before anyone else could speak. The homeowner sat there in silence, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and victory. They hadn't gotten answers, but the president's reaction had confirmed something important. He was hiding something. The board members looked at each other. One of them, the soft-spoken man from earlier, approached the homeowner quietly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I can't say much, but you're not wrong. This isn't how things used to be. He changed everything once he took full control." "Why?" the homeowner asked. The board member hesitated, glancing toward the doorway. "There's someone he works with outside the neighborhood. Someone who buys houses. I don't know the details. But every time he pushes someone out, the same buyer shows up within days." The homeowner felt a chill crawl across their skin. "Why won't anyone stop him?" they asked. "Because he threatens to fine the board members too," the man said softly, "or remove them. Nobody wants to deal with the trouble." He gave a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry. That's all I can say." Dar. The homeowner left the community center slowly, absorbing everything they had learned. The sun was bright, but the world felt dimmer. They walked home with their mind racing. So it was true. The HOA president wasn't enforcing rules. He was manipulating them. Each letter, each warning, so-called violation was part of a plan to push people toward frustration and fear until they wanted to leave. And when they did, someone was ready to swoop in and buy the property. It was a pattern, a system, a scheme. And now, the homeowner was the next target. As soon as they reached their house, they sat on the porch steps and stared at the street. Everything looked normal. Kids on bikes, neighbors watering plants, dogs barking in the distance. But underneath that normal life was something darker, something that had gone unnoticed for too long. The homeowner realized they had a choice. They could let themselves be pushed out like the others. Or they could fight back, not with anger or arguments, but with truth. They just didn't know how yet. That evening, the homeowner received another letter. It was thinner than the others, just a single sheet. Inside it simply read, "You will receive notice of the board's decision in the coming days." No details. No explanation. No list of violations. Just a silent warning. The homeowner folded the letter slowly, placing it with the others. For the first time, the letters didn't scare them. They irritated them. They felt like weak attempts to maintain control. Later that night, the homeowner sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. They began writing everything down: dates, times, letters, conversations, odd behavior. They were building a timeline, something clear and organized. Something real because something inside them had shifted. They weren't confused anymore. They weren't scared. They were ready to uncover the truth. Ready to expose whatever was happening, ready to face whatever. The HOA president planned next, as they closed the notebook. They took one last look out the window. The streetlights glowed softly, casting long shadows across the pavement. Something told them the next part of this story wouldn't be quiet, it would be loud, it would be messy, and it would change everything. The next few days moved slowly, almost like the air around the house had grown heavy. He tried to distract himself with work and small tasks, but every time he walked past his front window, he found himself looking toward the street, wondering what the HOA would try next. It wasn't fear that troubled him anymore. It was the unsettling feeling of not knowing their next move. And even more than that, it was the confusion of why they were so determined to push him. He kept replaying everything in his head. The warnings, the threats, the strange behavior from the board, the private conversations that stopped when he walked by, the way they looked at him as if he was some kind of problem they had been waiting to remove. He couldn't understand it. He was quiet, paid his dues, kept to himself, and tried to be respectful. If anything, he avoided drama. So why him? Why now? One morning, as he stepped outside to take out the trash, he noticed a car he had never seen before parked down the street. A dark-colored sedan with tinted windows. It wasn't completely out of place, but the timing felt off. He didn't usually notice cars, but something about this one made him pause. He watched it for a moment. No movement inside. No one nearby. He pushed the trash bin to the curb and walked back inside, trying to convince himself he was overthinking. But the same car showed up again the next morning. And the next, by the third day, he couldn't ignore it. It didn't belong to anyone on the block. It didn't move. And each time he looked toward it, he felt like someone inside might be watching him. He didn't want to jump to wild ideas, but the curiosity mixed with discomfort made his stomach twist. Inside the house, he sat at the dining table, trying to refocus on his work. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the strange behavior of the HOA board. He wondered if they were trying to gather some kind of excuse to catch him doing something wrong. But he wasn't doing anything wrong. And even if he was, watching him like that seemed too extreme. Later that afternoon, he heard a knock on the door. Not the soft kind, but the quick, almost urgent kind that hinted at irritation. He hesitated before opening it. When he did, he found the HOA president standing there, arms crossed and wearing the same stiff expression he was becoming used to. The president didn't waste time with greetings. "We need to talk," he said. He stepped back slightly but kept his voice calm. "What is this about now?" The president pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it out. "This is your final notice. The board has reviewed your violations again. You are out of compliance with the neighborhood standards, and we will be taking corrective action if you continue to ignore the rules." He stared at the paper. "What violation?" "You already took down the last notice because it wasn't valid." "That was a temporary decision," the president replied sharply. "The board has new information." He felt a wave of confusion. "What new information?" "That's between the board members," the president said. "You will receive the details soon. For now, this is your final notice." He looked at the paper again, without touching it. The president held it out impatiently, shaking it slightly. "I'm not taking anything unless I know exactly what this is about," he said. The president's jaw tightened. "You are refusing to cooperate again. This will go on record." "On record for what?" He kept his voice steady, though he felt himself heat with frustration. "You'll find out soon enough," the president said, and pushed the folded paper into his hand. Before he could respond, the president walked away briskly, as if the conversation had already ended in his mind. He closed the door slowly and unfolded the paper. There were no details inside, no explanation, no dates, no evidence, just a vague statement repeating that he was out of compliance. It was so empty that it almost seemed like they created it just to intimidate him. He sat down and took a deep breath. For the first time, the situation started to feel less like poor communication and more like something else entirely. Something targeted. Something personal. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, someone who had lived on the street much longer than him. It read, "Hey, have you noticed that car that keeps parking down the road? People are talking. Be careful." He stared at the message. So he wasn't the only one who noticed. That made his skin prickle. He typed back, "Do you know who it belongs to?" A few seconds passed before the answer came. "No idea. But someone said they think it might be connected to the board." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing deeper into him. What was the HOA doing? Watching him? Waiting for something? Trying to intimidate him into leaving? He wasn't the type of person to panic, but he wasn't someone who liked being pushed either. He didn't want to fight, but he also wasn't going to let them walk all over him. That evening, he stepped outside again. The sky was dimming, leaving a soft orange glow on the roofs around him. He looked toward the same spot down the road. There it was, the car. Same place. Same angle. Same stillness. He felt the urge to walk toward it, just to see if someone would react. But he stopped himself. He didn't want things to escalate, and he didn't want to give anyone a reason to twist the story. Instead, he stayed on the sidewalk and pretended to check his mail while keeping the car in his peripheral vision. No movement inside. No window rolling down. Nothing. He went back inside and locked the door. He wasn't scared of the car, But the way everything lined up and known violations, strange behavior, the president acting like something secret was happening, made the entire situation feel more serious. That night, he found it harder to sleep. Every small noise made him open his eyes. He wasn't being dramatic. There was something happening in the background, and the silence about it only made it worse. The next morning, after barely sleeping, he stepped outside once again. The car was gone. For the first time in days, the street looked normal, quiet, peaceful. He felt relief wash over him, but it didn't last. As he walked toward his driveway, he noticed something sitting near his mailbox. A small envelope. No stamp. No name. Just placed there. He looked around. No one in sight. The houses were still. The morning breeze was soft, almost too soft. He picked up the envelope and held it carefully, as if it might break. He walked inside before opening it. His hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming pressure of the unknown. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. On it, in messy writing, were just 3 words. "They are watching." He froze. His breath caught in his throat. He read the words again. Then again, he sat down at the table and stared at them, his heart beating with a quiet, steady tension. Who wrote this? Why leave it anonymously? Was it a warning? A threat? A clue? Whatever it meant. He knew one thing for certain. This was no longer a simple disagreement with the HOA. Something bigger was happening, and he was right in the middle of it. The calm days were gone. The strange signs, the pressure, the quiet hostility, it all meant the same thing. Part 5 would not be simple. Something was coming, and it would change everything. He stared at the note for what felt like a long time, even though only a few minutes had passed. The words looked messy and rushed, but the message was sharp enough to cut through whatever doubt he had left. Someone out there wanted him to know that the situation was not just strange, it was dangerous. Or at least headed in a direction that could no longer be ignored. He set the note on the table and rubbed his face with both hands. He didn't want to assume the worst, but everything that had happened over the past few days pointed towards something carefully planned. The vague violation letters. The strange meetings. The car parked down the street like a silent watcher. And now this anonymous message. He stood up and paced around the living room. He didn't want fear to guide his decisions, but ignoring the signs felt even worse. He reached for his phone, not sure who he planned to call, and then stopped. Who would he even talk to? The HOA clearly wasn't going to explain anything. Some neighbors whispered instead of speaking openly. And the police? What would he tell them? That a board of homeowners was quietly watching him. It sounded almost silly, but he knew it wasn't. The next few hours dragged on. He checked the window every now and then, expecting the car to return, but the streets stayed empty. Too empty. The calm almost felt staged. Later that afternoon, he heard another knock on the door. This time it was slower, more hesitant. He waited a moment before opening it. When he did, he found one of the neighbors standing there, someone he had only spoken to a handful of times. The neighbor looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "Do you have a minute?" The neighbor asked. "Yeah." "Sure," he said, stepping aside. The neighbor walked in and closed the door behind him. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood in the entryway like every second mattered. "I shouldn't even be here," the neighbor whispered. "But you need to know what's going on." He felt his stomach tighten. "All right, tell me." The neighbor took a deep breath. "The board. They've been planning something for a while now. Not just with you. With a few homeowners. You just happen to be the one they're focusing on right now." "And me?" he asked, confused. "Because you don't back down," the neighbor said. "You questioned them. You challenged their notice. And they don't like when anyone does that. That's it," he said, almost not believing it. The neighbor shook his head. "There's more. They want to make an example out of someone. They think if they pressure one person hard enough, everyone else will fall in line." He felt anger rising slowly. Not loud anger, the kind that builds inside like a tightening rope. They've been trying to collect things they can use. the neighbor continued. Pictures, notes, excuses, anything. They think if they gather enough, they can force you to pay fines or even take legal action. But the thing is, they don't actually have anything real. That's why they keep giving you vague notices. The explanation finally made everything click. The mixed-up warnings. The so-called new information. The strange behavior during meetings. But what about the car? He asked quietly. Was that them? The neighbor hesitated. Some people think so. Some think it's part of their pressure tactics. They want you uneasy. Someone left a note at my mailbox, he said. It said they're watching. The neighbor shook his head quickly. That wasn't from the board? Then who? He asked. I don't know, the neighbor said. But someone else in the neighborhood is tired of what the board is doing, and they're trying to warn you. He stood still. Everything inside him felt suddenly heavy and sharp. They're going to call a meeting soon, the neighbor added. A closed meeting. They want to vote on action against you. I heard them talking. They think they can force you to follow their rules by hitting your wallet first. What do they expect me to do? He asked, trying to stay calm. They don't care, the neighbor said softly. They just want power. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The neighbor finally stepped backward toward the door. I can't stay long. If they find out I talked to you, they'll come after me next. Why did you come then? He asked. Because someone has to be decent, the neighbor replied quietly. And because you didn't deserve any of this? He nodded, grateful in a way he couldn't properly express. The neighbor left quickly, leaving behind a silence so deep that the house felt bigger than usual. He stood near the door for a moment, then walked back to the table and looked at the anonymous note again. He didn't know if the person who wrote it was the same one who warned him today. But either way, the message now had more weight. He wasn't dealing with simple HOA rules. This was control, pressure, fear tactics. But something unexpected started to grow inside. A kind of quiet determination. If they wanted to pressure him into breaking, they weren't going to get it. The next day a letter arrived in his mailbox. This one was official, thick, and sealed with the HOA stamp. Inside was a notice of an upcoming special meeting. The letter claimed they needed to discuss ongoing non-compliance issues. The date was only 2 days away. 2 days. The timing was already suspicious. He sat at the table and read the letter 3 times. He knew what was coming. The board wanted to corner him. Force him into paying fines he didn't know. Label him as the problem. But they didn't know something important. He wasn't alone anymore. That evening, his phone buzzed. A message from another neighbor, someone he didn't even know well. It said, I heard what they're planning. You're not the only one tired of them. We're with you. He stared at the message, surprised. Then another came. Then another. In just a few minutes, he had messages from people he barely talked to. Some were short. Some were long. But they all shared the same feeling. Everyone was tired of the board. Everyone was tired of being pushed. Everyone wanted change. And he, without meaning to, had become the person standing at the front of that change. The day of the meeting arrived quickly. He walked toward the neighborhood center feeling nervous but steady. When he reached the entrance, he froze. A crowd had gathered, not a small group. Dozens. Neighbors stood together, arms crossed, waiting. Some nodded at him. Some whispered encouragement. Some stepped aside to let him walk through. He hadn't asked anyone to come. He didn't even know they planned this. Inside the meeting room, HOA board members sat behind a long table looking surprised and uneasy. They weren't expecting a crowd. They definitely weren't expecting unity. The president cleared his throat. This is a closed meeting, he said. No, one of the neighbors said loudly. Not anymore, more voices joined. We're done with your games. The board members shifted nervously. He stepped forward. If you have something to say about me, you can say it in front of everyone. Or maybe the truth is, you don't have anything real to say at all. The room went quiet. The president tried to recover, flipping through papers. There have been multiple violations, show them, someone said from the back. Yeah, Show the evidence, another added. The president's face turned tense. He shuffled through the folder again, but didn't pull anything out. One of the board members whispered to another. Panic flickered across their faces. Do you even have proof? He asked calmly. Silence. It lasted long enough for everyone in the room to understand the truth. They had nothing. No evidence. No violations. Just intimidation. Someone from the crowd spoke up. I think we should vote to remove the entire board. The room erupted in agreement. The board members looked stunned. They tried to regain control, but the homeowners had already made up their minds. A vote was taken right there, and just like that, within minutes, the entire board was removed. The crowd let out a sigh of relief, but more than that, a sense of freedom. A new group of volunteers stepped up immediately to form an interim board. He stood still, taking everything in. He hadn't planned any of this. He never wanted a fight, but somehow, the pressure meant to break him had ended up breaking the system that tried to control him. After the meeting ended, neighbors surrounded him with supportive words. Not loud or dramatic, just honest, warm, human support. As he walked home, the sky was calm. No strange cars. No tense silence. Just a peaceful neighborhood finally breathing again. When he reached his mailbox, he saw something waiting there, a small envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence written in that same messy handwriting. Shh, you weren't alone. He smiled, a quiet, grateful smile. The story had started with threats, but it ended with something stronger, unity, and the knowledge that even when things look dark, someone out there is watching. Not to hurt you, but to help you stand.